Some of your families have known tough times during the course of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. You're graduating into a still healing job market, and some of you are carrying student loan debt that you're concerned about. And yet your generation, the most educated, the most diverse, the most tolerant, the most politically independent, and the most digitally fluent in our history, is also on record as being the most optimistic about our future. And I'm here to tell you that you are right to be optimistic. You are right to be optimistic.
What about economically? All right, how would you like to make a fortune? How would you like America to make a fortune? And as we dig into a slowing U.S. economy, here's some advice from one who follows it a lot closer than the common woman or man, yours truly included. Leave America alone. Let's start some real talk about money right here with our next guest, the author of The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy, How to Save Yourself and Your Country. Peter Schiff joins us on Midpoint today. Peter, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so let's just start right there. Leave America alone. Why is that the answer, in your opinion?
Well, if you're talking about the government needs to leave America alone because the government has been doing a lot of damage. We just heard President Obama speaking to some graduating seniors, telling them about some of the problems in the economy. The government has caused those problems. In fact, the reason that these graduating students have so much debt is because of the government. And the reason they're graduating into a job market that basically doesn't have any jobs is because of the government. So the government needs to get out of the way. That's our only chance at regaining the prosperity that the government took away from us.
All right, so let's talk about that then. Let's get the government out of the way. Where do we start?
Well, we can start at the top and work our way down.
Well, okay, let's say we can't do that right away because we know that you have a coming election, you have midterm elections. Where do we start then without having to go, first of all, right to changing the president? Little things.
Well, we got to start repealing all sorts of rules and regulations. The government has to make itself a lot smaller, so it's a much lighter burden on the economy. We need to make government smaller so the economy can grow. That's deregulation, lots of cuts in government spending. We have to reform our tax system so that we don't punish hard work and encourage just debt and consumption. We got to go back to sound money. We got to get the Federal Reserve out of the money printing and price fixing business. So we have to let interest rates go up, and we have to let the financial chips fall where they may. If companies are going to fail, the government has to get out of the way and let it happen.
All right, explain sound money, if you would.
Well, money that has value, not just money the Fed just creates out of thin air. We've got to have higher interest rates that strike a real balance between savings and borrowing. Right now, the only money that's available is to speculators, to government, to big companies. But smaller businesses that make the capital investments that really grow the economy are being starved for credit because the Fed is misdirecting it to places it shouldn't go.
I just saw this cross the wire, and I know you probably haven't seen it yet, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because it's interesting how it works into our discussion here. The headline, federal tax revenues set record through May. Fed still running $436 billion deficit. It says here the federal government's total receipts for the fiscal year closed May at $1 trillion. Actually, I think it might even be $1 trillion. It's almost $2 trillion is what they're talking about here. This is an incredible amount of money. And aren't we told sometimes that this money doesn't exist?
Well, it's only incredible until you compare it to how much the government is spending. That's an even more incredible number. As much as the government collects in taxes, that's still not enough to satisfy all the spending. So the Federal Reserve has to print a lot of money, which drives down the value of the dollar, which makes the price of food go up, which makes the price of energy go up, and which stops other prices from falling. Price declines would be a relief to American consumers. It would enable them to enjoy higher standards of living, but instead they have to pay an inflation tax to finance all this government spending.
Here's something that I found interesting because I know that you are just absolutely steadfast. You want to avoid all U.S.-based financial assets. Is that correct?
Well, I think we're headed for a dollar crisis. And so if you own dollar-denominated assets, you're going to see a substantial decline in the real purchasing power of those assets. And so in order to really preserve your wealth and make money not just nominally, but in real terms, I believe you have no other choice but to look outside the United States, look to invest in stock markets in countries that have much sounder economies and much sounder currencies.
But the U.S. stocks, here's the pushback you'll get from some people, that the U.S. stocks themselves, they're outperforming the overseas markets for nearly 3 years.
Well, not in 2014. Thus far, the U.S. market is a laggard this year. That was true in 2013 and for part of 2012. But that is the exception, not the rule. I think over the long term, the U.S. market has significantly underperformed global markets, and I think that gap is going to widen in the years ahead.
You believe that we are on the verge of a much worse financial crisis than we had in 2008. Peter, I have to tell you, that scares the daylights out of a lot of people. Other people are saying, though, wait a minute, seriously, worse than that? How could anything get worse?
Well, believe me, it can. And remember, I was one of the few people who forecast the financial crisis of 2008, and people said, oh, that's impossible. That's not going to happen. Well, it did happen, and unfortunately, it's going to happen again, only worse. And the same people who were oblivious to the last crisis are just as blind to this one. And the reason it's going to happen and the reason it's going to be worse is because the government has created it. Every time we have a crisis that the government creates, their solution, their cure, is to do more of what caused it in the first place. So we stimulated our way into a housing bubble. It was artificially low interest rates that inflated that bubble. It was government involvement in the housing market that provided the moral hazard. The problem is monetary policy is much easier now. It's much more reckless today than it was in the years where we inflated the housing bubble. The government is even more involved in screwing up the economy now than it was then. So now they've created an even bigger problem, and when it blows up, the crisis is going to be that much larger.
About 30 seconds left. If we start taking action right now, if things are changed in Washington now, how long would it take to get this economy back on track, back on a solid footing, in your opinion?
Well, that's a real hypothetical because it's never going to happen.
Sure.
Our leaders don't have the integrity to do what's right. They don't even have the intelligence to do what's right. But if we did, it would be a very bitter pill to swallow. Unfortunately, we'd have a lot of short-term pain for a lot of segments of the economy, but it would work. We would overcome it, we would restructure, and we can have a real growing economy so those college grads that the president was talking to would actually have something to be optimistic about, actually might be able to get a decent job. Because as of now, based on what the president is doing, they've got nothing to look forward to except debt, inflation, and joblessness.
Welcome to 2014 in economics. It's scary indeed. Peter Schiff, thanks so much for joining us, Peter. We'll talk again.
Anytime.
All right, it's scary if you're a graduate out there. It's scary if you're a businessman or if you're sitting in an anchor chair right now, trust me. Hey, by the way, are you really optimistic? Social media is the way to tell us. Are you optimistic? Why and why not? You tell us, then we talk to you. Because every day here on Midpoint, we question everything.